Welcome back to Quick Cuts. Energy management systems promise to make buildings smarter, but in too many cases, operators are stuck wading through endless alerts, alarms, and KPIs. Add to that inconsistent commissioning practices across different integrators and systems, and you've got a perfect recipe for data fatigue. Instead of clarity, team get noise. Instead of action, they get paralysis. The real question isn't how much data you can capture, it's how you build a culture that acts on the right signals consistently and decisively. To unpack that, I'm joined by Ryan Adelman, CEO of Phoenix Energy Technologies. Ryan spent years helping Fortune 500 portfolios move from alarm triage to what he calls a decision culture, where small teams use data that actually drives action, not overwhelm them. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the Climate Gap Quick Cuts, a podcast for busy people building climate solutions. We spotlight founders, builders, operators, and investors doing the hard work behind real progress. I'm Ben, co-founder of Element 6. We connect climate tech companies with the people who make scale possible. Let's get into it.
So, Ryan, thanks ever so much for joining us. For those that aren't aware of you, could you give us a brief intro to you and your role at Phoenix?
Yeah, sure. So I'm the CEO of Phoenix. I've been at Phoenix now, just celebrated my 6th anniversary. I joined in really a business development function when I first joined Phoenix, managing technology and technology partnerships and alliances. And then about 2.5 years ago, I took over the product team, providing more strategic leadership to the product organization in terms of roadmap and where we're going. And then about 1.5 years ago, I took over the CEO role. And now, I'm leading the company kind of into, the next iteration of its, offering in the market. So that's me. By background, I've worked in, the built environment and distributed energy since about 2007 and, worked in small and large companies, including companies as big as Siemens to early stage startups in energy storage and large utilities. So I feel kind of all of those experiences have kind of ideally suited me to kind of help Phoenix grow and provide value to multiple stakeholders in the built environment.
Yeah, awesome. Well, it's certainly an exciting time as an observer of Phoenix.
Yeah.
I'm excited to jump into this episode. Let's start with the pain point. Unfortunately, many operators are drowning in alerts. And in your view, why do EMS platforms so often overwhelm teams rather than actually empower them?
Yeah. So, my answer is very specific to a multi-site commercial environment, right?
Yeah.
This may be different for single building if you own one building or two buildings, or maybe it's just a big hospital and, you've got a Siemens or a Honeywell or Schneider managing. But
Yeah.
the commercial building owners and operators that we serve own multi-site. So that's large regional, or it could be, in many cases, it's national footprint in throughout North America, including Canada and Puerto Rico and Mexico. And so I think the first issue you find is you have very large portfolio of buildings and related assets, but you have very small teams. So very small teams in energy and facilities, and even from the technician perspective, have to manage extremely large portfolios. And so with really small teams, not surprisingly, I think you find that you have understaffing, right? Understaffing is a major issue. And even with the most timely and actionable data, these teams typically don't have the bandwidth to evaluate or even execute on the information and data they see. They need someone to help. And so and then in addition to that, I think that you find that a highly related issue is that in multi-site environment, you very rarely find one single EMS system. So, EMS, we prefer building automation system, building management system, energy management system. It's a control, right? These are SCADA controls for the most part, direct digital controls. And again, because in a multi-site commercial environment, there's so much M&A in the space where a banner leaves, a retailer leaves and maybe a Best Buy comes in and rebrands, or it's very common in grocery. The control infrastructure, the EMS, if we want to call it that, is already there. It doesn't make sense to rip and replace it. But what you end up with is a portfolio of a real estate portfolio where you have multiple different versions. You have different models. So they could be from, any number of what we controlled OEMs that we see out there, from NextRev to Venstar to Honeywell to Danfoss, Emerson, you name it. There's dozens. And even within the same controller type, you could have a different version of the controller. You could have a different version of firmware. And even when all those things are harmonized the same, you could have had a different system integrator configure and install one of the locations than another one. So that exacerbates kind of the light staffing. And then related, in our experience of these EMS systems, have kind of the flexible, customizable, automated kind of action engines that do things like automate tickets in the customer CMMS system, or have IVR functionality where they can follow up on an alarm and alert, right, flexibly, a store manager or a technician, and workflows that help small teams take action on the data they're getting. That is not typically a strength of kind of your off-the-shelf EMS system. Yeah. And so I'm trying to think, there's a couple other reasons I think it's a problem. The other is that the data is unreliable. So a lot of times they don't trust the data. There's inconsistent information because of the disparate systems that I mentioned, with different firmware versions configured differently. That makes the data difficult, what we call data quality, to trust. I think as well, structurally, when you think about EMS system providers, are typically hardware-centric companies, right? They're by design, they're hardware first, right? And software kind of second. It's hard to be really good at two things. You're really good at software and analytics. You're great at building hardware. To do both is a very difficult thing to do, not to say that no one does it. Yeah. And so as a result, I think those who provide analytics and kind of automated workflows can only do so kind of in their estate, right? In my EMS, I could do it here, but you've got Novar and you have these other building automation systems. I can't really help you. And so that exacerbates the issue. I'm a small team of facility or energy people, but I've got all the, I'm getting bric-a-brac, somewhat what I need with one EMS provider, but the other, they don't have that capability. And so I think that's another big issue. And the fourth really is, I would say, the frequency of changes that are occurring in these buildings. We call this optimization entropy, right? Where you can optimize and get everything set to the ideal for comfort, for energy efficiency, and that is going to just drift away from the optimal so fast, because many times you have store managers or people who can override set points, as an example, and they don't get set back. Frequently, technicians, when they come for whether it's preventative maintenance or repair, they're overriding settings, things like economizer mode, right? Which is a great way to save money. You're using fresh air to when the conditions are right to condition the space, but they override it. And so is a constant whack-a-mole to try to stay on top of all of these changes that are happening in the facility. So there could be other reasons, but those are four that really pop out.
That image of a whack-a-mole really hits with that point. So moving on, when teams are stuck in alarm triage, it's not just frustrating, it undermines the whole point of investing in these systems, right? So what are some of the real-world costs you see when organizations don't act on data effectively?
Yeah. So I think we see kind of three things. And the first is what I would call business interruption. And so it's occupant comfort. That could also, not only occupant, but customers, associates, but also inventory integrity. So again, much of the useful data and analytics, that we provide at Phoenix is preventative, right? It's seeing trends in advance that are likely to impact the performance of your HVAC and your refrigeration equipment, so you can get ahead of it. And it could include, weather data, third-party data sources that tell you there's going to be a major heating event that you get from a weather service to tell you, hey, let's start cooling in advance, right? Because we know that the health of the HVAC equipment, and given the tonnage, they're probably not going to be able to meet zone temperature, right, if it's 100 degrees for 26 hours. Yeah. So not being able to do that is a major issue. And so the failure to act in advance typically results in stores, in the summer get too hot. So 80-degree OSHA, store close, shut. We have many customers who have told us when we first get engaged that store closures is their biggest single issue, and they are desperate to find a way to get ahead of it and are kind of pulling their hair out. So related loss of inventory, if you can't monitor, and we see this more in the dollar stores and C stores with less sophisticated refrigeration systems, they don't have a centralized way of not only seeing the temperature of all of their cases, but automating a workflow to manage it, right, in a way that doesn't overwhelm, a small team of facilities people.
Yeah.
And then, there's opportunity expense. So, when you have thousands of corporate set point standards for, occupied cooling being overridden, there's a significant energy kind of opportunity cost to, not being on top of that and not enforcing that. And then I would say, so that's, comfort, integrity, kind of opportunity cost is a major one. But there's also, I think, an impact to the what we call kind of life cycle asset ownership cost. And so, when you're stuck in a reactive model of maintenance and repair, where you're pretty much, again, whack-a-mole, you're responding to it's too hot, and you're showing up to a building and not knowing what of your 12 RTUs are causing the issue, right? You're doing emergency truck rolls when you could have just done a controller reset. There's a significant cost and impact to just your overall the total life cycle cost of maintaining those assets. And so, if you have good information and data, you can really get ahead of that and make better decisions. And then the final, like the impact of those two things, I think, is credibility. I think there's a credibility issue that, the small teams we work with can experience when you're constantly having to explain losses in comfort, business interruption, being over budget, on your utility and your maintenance, line item. Those impact the credibility of those teams. And, the other side of the house is very much focused on revenue, and they just expect the stores to work and be comfortable. So that can be really hard for people behind the scenes, who don't get recognized for the great work they do, and they just get yelled at when, it's hot or they have to close a store.
Yeah. Shout out to all of those workers.
Yes.
On the flip side, some companies seem to break through consistently, turning data into action. What separates those organizations, do you think, culturally, structurally, from the ones that just stay stuck?
Well, that's interesting. I guess from a cultural standpoint, and a lot of times it starts there, right? The culture enables the change. I think there needs to be, an organizational kind of ethos of learning and continuous improvement and willing to take risks and in order to make improvement. And so that's not easy to find, to the extent that you can be an active follower and create that kind of culture, even maybe within your team, is something that, you can create change, even if it's not coming from the top culturally. But I would say, some of the best outcomes when customers are kind of getting out of that rut of being reactive and overwhelmed is really education and learning, getting out there, go to the conferences, find out what their peers are doing. The conferences we attend, like the EEIs and the FMIs and Connexes, are great ways to learn and find out how your peers are doing and how are other people doing it. You even ask, your vendors, people like Phoenix and others, like the top quartile of your customers, what are they doing differently? So you can compare and contrast that from the way that you're operating. And then you can start to learn kind of what is the art of possible, right? So you can align on a goal, be honest about, I think, the internal capability gaps your organization has. It's, it's nothing to be ashamed of. It just is what it is. Everyone has gaps. But as long as you're aligned and clear on it, and those gaps could be some of your choices you've made for legacy. We're talking about EMS. There's a lot of really old systems out there, right, that are technically still working, but, right, they provide limitations, and there's an implicit cost to, holding on to something well beyond its depreciable life. Yeah. So I think being honest, with what you have, and also kind of identifying a goal on the hill, I think they should they should also audit their assets and really kind of their device infrastructure to ensure at a minimum that those devices can give them at least the raw data they need to be proactive. In some cases, you can't even consistently and reliably get data out of this equipment. And that, if you can't do that, then you don't have anything to work with, right? And so I think the next step from just is it reliable is, are these systems designed and work well? They play well with third parties. Because as I mentioned earlier, the EMS OEM is not always, the ideal entity to kind of help you really kind of get to the next level of being, filtering through native alarm kind of analysis paralysis to automating workflows to being kind of really software focused. And so you need to evaluate these units and determine, like, will they play well? Do they play well with any third party? Or it could be your own analytics team wanting to pull data out of this equipment. Does it play well? Does it as an API, or is it proprietary and closed? And there's limitations in terms of integration. And then I think the last thing, the traits that these are companies that, they act quickly. They don't get bogged down in analysis paralysis, pilot, test, and ensure that the criteria for your tests are kind of binary. It's either it did this or didn't do this, right? Try not to make things a little I would say subjective. And we see kind of the best decisions coming from saying, this was our goal, this is what we tested, this is the criteria for success, and the vendor hit it, yes or no. And I think if you're just kind of doing those things are going to get you, I think, out of the rut that you've been in.
Yeah, love that. Love that simplicity.
Yeah.
So let's think now about operators, any operators listening who feel buried under alarms right now. What practical steps can they start to make a better decision culture, moving from firefighting and much more focus on action?
Yeah, I think you could say this for, like, this is a metaphor for any problem of anywhere. It could be in a marriage, it could be in a business, and where you are firefighting and you're overwhelmed, but that's not sustainable and you're trying to break free. So I think the start here is to kind of write it down, force rank what your biggest issues are, right? And assign a cost to them, even if it's just, basic estimate, put your assumptions down and try to get a list. These are the 5 things that are causing the biggest impact to the business, and get some sense for, what does it cost us today? What does this cost us, status quo? And document, this is how we do it. What is the current workflow? Even if it's, ugly, or if it's disjointed, or maybe you're only doing 3 of the 10 things you probably need to do, that's still, it's very important to capture the current state and what the impact is to the business, because that gives you the starting point to build the business case to improve it. This is my baseline, my reference. I know what I need to improve, and this is the cost of doing business, right? And then the next step is kind of what you start to put that together. You really need to get a financial sponsor internally in the organization and get their buy-in. Find someone who really likes change management, who likes to see the art of possible, to kind of get buy-in and the ROI and the impact of investing in these changes. And then I would say then, repeat what I said to your last question is, go to the conferences, learn, test a few solutions out with your sponsor. And I think eventually, you'll find you'll learn so much as you go through that process. You're already on the path to improvement.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll take some of those nuggets for my personal relationship with Lewis.
Yeah.
Finally, as the industry continues to lean more and more into AI and automation, what role do you see decision culture playing? Is it about replacing human judgment, or reinforcing it with better priorities? Where do you see it?
A couple reactions to your question. And the first is, we've watched very closely kind of this, as many companies and most companies do, have watched kind of the AI kind of hype cycle build. And we have never, I think, envisioned Phoenix that we would be leading the charge and the first to market with the innovation around this, because what we've been doing has been working really well, first of all, and our customers are happy and our retention is really high and we're growing quickly. So I also felt like there was some potential risk to us as a company and an honest broker, which we are for our customers as it relates to technology, if we didn't really fully understand what the impact of AI was going to be as we kind of round that kind of, the crest of the hype cycle. And so, like you said, we've been in business for 20 years and we have a reputation and our customers trust us for our judgment. It is not our style to come in with a shiny object and say, just set it and forget it, and this is going to solve all your problems. And so I feel like, this has been important patience for Phoenix to exercise, to kind of watch and see what's working and what isn't. What are really good use cases for different types of AI in particular? When we talk about AI today, for the most part, we're talking about learning models and large language models. There's different types of AI. And so we've taken, I think, a very thoughtful and careful approach to identifying where, again, what we talk about in terms of modern AI is really good fit for purpose for the technical problem or the challenge that we're trying to address. And so I'm using our own experience as maybe an example of how others can look at it in the market. There are absolutely in a business that's in a multi-site environment in particular, where you're dealing with so many assets and so much dirty data and unstructured data. There are great use cases for AI, particularly where the first place we started using it is in how we organize and classify data so that we can very quickly implement and get our customers' facilities into kind of our environment where they can get value, right? That is a perfect use case for AI because it's very manual and it's, but it's repeatable. There are other areas where, like diagnostics and our fault detection diagnostics, where AI, I think, can be really valuable because you can train it on so much data, like native fault codes coming out of HVAC equipment to come up with diagnostics. And so I think the net is you've really got to learn and understand the limits of kind of modern tools. I don't believe that we're at a point yet, certainly in multi-site kind of HVAC lighting, refrigeration optimization, that there is a set it and forget it and there will be no problems. I wouldn't trust, my stores, if I were an operator, to some set it and forget it and, not being concerned that, that there isn't really good human oversight of kind of what those bots are doing. And so the net is, I feel, I guess, to maybe directly answer your question, I absolutely believe, and we're using in our business and see that AI is being additive. In some cases, it's making processes significantly faster and more accurate. On the call center side of our business, helping automate a lot of the low skill, repeatable things is improving our SLAs for our customers. But it is absolutely not a one size fits all. And you said it, forget it, and fire all your people. I just don't see. Again, I could be wrong, a world where you're replacing all of your people, but rather you're using modern AI to solve discrete technical problems and improve timeliness of response, and then allowing your team and your organization to focus on higher skill solutions and kind of services for your customer.
Yeah, I think I agree overwhelmingly with that. Well, that's it. Thank you so much, Ryan, for carving out your time and some really, really sharp insights that I know a lot of listeners will enjoy taking down. So thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, Ben. Appreciate it.
So here are a few takeaways I got from that conversation with Ryan. First, small teams, big portfolios. Even the smartest EMS doesn't help if the people behind it are stretched too thin. Systems need to make decisions easier, not add to the noise. Second, optimization entropy is real. Buildings drift, comfort, efficiency, and consistency all decay without constant attention. Third, education beats overwhelm. The best operators aren't just reacting, they're learning. They benchmark, share notes, and stay curious. Fourth, write it down. Quantify it, get sponsorship. Ryan's advice was simple but powerful. Document the real pain points, put a number to them, and build internal buy-in to fix them. And fifth, AI is additive, not autonomous. It can speed things up, but judgment still belongs to humans. The smartest buildings aren't the ones with the most data. They're the ones where every signal drives the decision. Thanks for listening to Quick Cuts. Short episodes, sharp insights, no filler. Catch you next time.
You've been listening to the Climate Gap Quick Cuts. If you're building in climate tech, subscribe to hear more from the people making it happen.